afternoon. I think we'll get started with today's program. It's a special treat. And today our Authors on Stage program is co-sponsored by Staying Put in New Canaan. So thank you very much for doing this with us and for being here today. And Elm Street Books is also here as a co-sponsor. So they do have the Kaufman's newest book in the back if you'd like to take a look at it. And if you'd like to purchase it, that's good too. And they also have copies at the store. The New England states, so rich in human history, are also abundantly blessed with natural history. An astonishing diversity of living things can be found in the woods, the fields, the marshes, and coastlines of this region, and even in backyards and city parks. A person who begins to notice the wonders of nature need never be bored here. Kenn Kaufman and Kimberly Kaufman travel throughout the New England states at all seasons of the year to research their new guide. They have both taught many sessions at the famed Audubon Camp on Hog Island, Maine, and have worked with nature centers, museums, and bird clubs throughout the region. Kenn is a lifelong naturalist and the originator of the Kaufman Field Guide series. He's also field editor for numerous publications, including Audubon Magazine, Birdwatching, and Wild Bird. As a teenager, he hitchhiked around North America pursuing birds, which led to the publication of Kingbird Highway, his memoir of the experience, and a classic among birders and naturalists. Kimberly is currently executive director of the Black Swamp Bird Observatory in Ohio and a contributing editor to Birds and Blooms magazine. Please join me in welcoming Kenn and Kimberly to New Canaan Library.
Okay, well, thank you, Susan. We're really pleased to be here. I have to say, I'm Kenn, that's Kimberly. When I was a kid, libraries were like, they were my magic kingdom that I would go to. I started going to libraries when I was about 4 years old, and I would sit on the floor and look at books, and it sort of opened up the whole world for me. And so getting to come and speak in a library is really a treat. So thank you so much for being here. And now I'll turn it over to Kim, and she'll do the rest of the program.
He's kidding. Yeah, I just want to echo what Kenn said. It's a real honor. In fact, this might be the highlight of our book tour. We're on a 2-week plus book tour. We're going to be in every New England state on the tour and visit some really amazing places, but I believe this is the only library on the tour, and it's a real honor to be here. Libraries also played an important role in my life and my development as a kid and as a student. There are also a number of things I'm thankful for. One, I'm very thankful to all of you for coming out today. I know it's in the middle of a beautiful afternoon. It seems funny to bring you all inside to talk about getting you outside, but I do appreciate you being here. In terms of being a journey of personal discovery, I'm discovering that I really enjoy being an author. Kenn has been a prolific author and a popular author. He's been on many book tours, and I've had the great fortune to travel along with him. However, this is our first book together, and it's a wonderful experience, and that leads me to my final thanks, and that's to Kenn himself. We've been married for about 7 years, and we're best friends. He's the love of my life. We share everything, but this field guide series represents Kenn's life work. He knew since he was 9 years old that this is what he wanted to do, to write books about nature, to encourage others to get outside and explore. And so for him to have the kind of trust and faith in me to share his life's work with me means everything to me. And so I'm very honored to be here presenting with Kenn today.
Well, I'm honored too, so it's mutual. As Kimberly was saying, I've been working on these field guides for a while. This particular series, the Bird Guide, was the first one that came out about 12 years ago, the one up there in the center, and went on from that to work with co-authors to do books on butterflies and mammals and insects and so on. But we hadn't done anything like this before, something that tries to cover the whole spectrum of nature. And when you do something like that, it's a different sort of approach, and different from the kind of thing where you can just focus on one group of living things. Trying to look at everything is a different proposition. I mean, obviously, if you're a thinking person, you realize that when you go outside, you're surrounded by all kinds of things, and you know, it's hard to just be focused on one particular group. But for both of us, we actually got into birds first. Birds were the entryway or the gateway for both of us. And in my case, I started really young. That's me on the upper right there. I started quite young, and Kimberly had a slightly different approach.
So I hope that there are at least a few people in the audience today that have at least a passing interest in birds. Is that true? Good. I see a lot of heads nodding. That's wonderful. Well, I don't know if your experience was like mine, but for me, my interest in birds began in a moment, one pivotal moment in my life. I grew up on a farm in rural Ohio. I was outdoors every day that you could be. And so I felt like I grew up with a good understanding and an awareness and appreciation of nature and all the things that were to explore outdoors. But it wasn't until my late 20s when I was at an appointment, and outside the office building, I noticed a feeder. And on that feeder, every perch was filled with this blazing gold American goldfinch. It was the middle of summer. The birds were at their finest. And I was just captivated. And I said to the folks in the office building, "Oh, you've got to tell me, what are these birds? Are they caged birds?" I had just never connected with the fact that living right under my nose my whole life in Ohio were these incredibly beautiful and glorious birds. And I was just so intrigued. And that moment really changed the course of my life. I went straight home, researched where to find bird feeders, bought every book I could find in every bookstore, took books out of the library to study birds and what else was out there that I had been unaware of up until then. The next step in my life as a birder and bird conservationist came when I realized that there were also bald eagles nesting in the county where I was living. Now, it's one thing for a tiny little goldfinch to fly under your nose all of your life and you're not aware of it. It's another thing entirely to have a bird with a 7-foot wingspan living in your world and you're not aware of it. I was really interested in learning more, so I got involved as a volunteer with our state wildlife agency. They had a volunteer monitoring program, and I began watching bald eagles, just rabidly interested. I spent thousands of hours monitoring bald eagle behavior through a spotting scope and got very interested in doing bird research. So from there, I got involved with Black Swamp Bird Observatory, and that was about 15 years ago. And I began working in the field, wearing hip waders out into our research stations every day and banding birds. I've banded many thousands of migrating birds through Ohio. I transitioned to education director and then most recently became the executive director of this wonderful little nonprofit in Northwest Ohio. And these experiences absolutely changed the course of my life. I had owned a small business that was completely unrelated to anything in nature, and I sold off the business and threw myself wholeheartedly through the door of birds and bird watching in nature, and now I'm the director of this wonderful bird observatory. So not only can birds bring interest and diversity to your life, they can change the course of your life, they can also help you find love.
Well, in my case, I also had a sort of a spark bird that got me going, but as you might imagine, it wasn't just something like a goldfinch. You know, for me, the spark bird was the house sparrow. Yeah, the city house sparrow, you know, the most numerous bird in every suburb and sidewalk in North America. At the age of 6, up to that point, you know, I'd been going to the library and looking through picture books. I wanted to see things like elephants and dinosaurs and giraffes, but we lived in Indiana and we didn't have those things in the neighborhood. So finally when I was about 6 years old, I thought, well, I'll take a day or two and figure out what these birds are. So when you're 6 years old and you put breadcrumbs out on the lawn and you creep up to this house sparrow and get a close look, up close it's such an intensive little creature. They're just so intensely alive and they've got these intricate patterns, and even though it's a common bird, when you see it up close, it just really represents what it is to be intensely alive. And so I was captivated by that. And I went on to look at other common kinds of birds. I mean, red-winged blackbird is a very common North American bird. It's not something that an experienced birder would get excited about, but it's just so it's so elegant in that, glossy black with red and yellow on the wings, and has this rich strident song. And when it's been a long winter, say, winter has been going on for 18 months, and you just think it's never going to end, and finally there's a warm day in late February or March, and the red-winged blackbirds show up in the marsh, and the males are sitting up there and singing and flashing those red shoulders. It's like, it's almost like a resurrection. It's like spring has come. And so, these common birds just sort of drew me along and got me, more and more fascinated with bird life, so that I really, by the time I was 9 years old, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And then I started to get interested in migratory birds, like this little black-throated green warbler. And ultimately, that led me to get involved with this girl who was studying migratory birds in Ohio.
So for both of us, birds were the very first step in our interest in getting us out inside in nature. But inevitably what happens is that when you're outside looking at birds, now this isn't to say that there aren't still really hardcore, serious birders in this country who don't want to be distracted with other things when they're outside looking at birds. But for most normal people, birds are just the first step, because when you're outside looking at birds, you can't help but notice something as beautiful as a coral hair streak, and it captures your imagination. And when you're down there looking at this butterfly and trying to identify it, you can't help but notice the beautiful flowers that these butterflies are nectaring on, and wonder, what is that plant that it's laying its eggs on? And when you're down there looking closely at these flowers, trying to figure out the ID, you can't help but notice that the creepy crawly things that are creeping around underneath the flowers. And there's so much out there to discover. In fact, this is one of my favorite snakes. This is a little brown snake, or a decay's snake, and they're fairly common in Ohio. And I like to refer to this with naturalists as a good introductory snake. For those that might have might be a little leery of learning more or being close to snakes, this isn't life-size. This is a very tiny snake. And if you could call a snake adorable, it would certainly fit the bill with the little brown snake. It's just a cute little thing. So if you have friends that are a little uncertain about how much they're going to enjoy snakes, perhaps you could introduce them to the little brown snake as a starting point.
Yeah, actually, what she's not telling you is that the person who's holding it, our friend Bob, his hand is like 5 feet long, so that's a huge serpent. But, no, Kimberly has got a line that I really like. Sometimes she'll say that nature doesn't take kindly to having her gifts ignored. And we've often, when we go out together, we've often felt as if nature was trying to teach us a lesson by making us look at things that we hadn't planned to look at. So if we go out just planning to look at birds, inevitably that will be the day when we see the most adorable baby raccoons, if a raccoon can be adorable. Or if we decide that we're just going to look at butterflies, that's the day we'll find some fabulous flower, or we'll see some great turtle or something. It's almost as if it's intentional, that nature is trying to keep us from just focusing on one thing at a time. So we found more and more we'd be going out and taking more and more different field guides with us to try to identify the things we found. And so we would load up the table with all these books, and then load up the day packs, and our day packs would weigh 80 pounds or 100 pounds. And then inevitably, the most fascinating thing we saw would be something that wasn't covered in the book that we left at home. So it's been an interesting progression as we tried to look at everything in nature.
You might say that Ken and I wrote the most recent book for ourselves, because as Ken said, lugging around all these different field guides out into the field with us got to be an increasing challenge. And so the whole catalyst for this was really our need, our desire for a book like this, and we thought that was a good place to start. So we talked to the publisher, and they were interested, willing to participate, and we began to think about what regions could we cover in this type of guide. A lot of people have asked us, why New England? Because this is the first. The New England Guide is the first regional guide. It's the first in a series of guides. So why New England? And we say, why not? Ken and I absolutely love it here. We've had such a fabulous time on this trip. And we also have a very personal connection to a place in New England. And Susan mentioned this in the introduction, That's the Audubon Camp on Hog Island on the coast of Maine. And there's this wonderful camp there for adults and for teenagers where you are just immersed in the nature of the coast of Maine. And Ken and I have been blessed to be instructors there for a number of years in the summer. And not only did it give us the opportunity to really get out and research the area, and it became the starting point for the research for the book, but it also allowed us to tap into the incredible knowledge of the staff and the volunteers on the camp. And in fact, one of the staff members there, a gentleman named Eric Snyder, who's a geologist by trade, wrote the geology section in the New England Guide for us. And it's just, I hope that you'll at least pick the book up and read through it and read that geology section. It's just a fascinating view into the real foundation of the whole New England states.
So we decided we were going to do New England, and the publisher being in Boston, they had no argument with that. So we still had the issue of deciding what to include. There are a lot of different things living in the New England states. I mean, there's something like 4,000 plus species of flowering plants. You know, that's just plants. That's before you get to the interesting stuff. So that was a joke. So it was going to have to be selective, and we already had some experience with being selective. Earlier on, like the mammal guide, the guide to North American mammals, we included everything. You know, every bat that has ever flown from Cuba across to Florida, or every whale that's ever come within 200 miles of the coast, they're all in there. But when it came to the insect book, there are something like 90,000 species of insects in North America, and we couldn't treat all of those, even though Eric Eaton, my co-author on that book, wanted to treat all of them. We couldn't get them all in. So Eric Eaton and I went back and forth on this, just lots of discussion of what to include, and sort of settled on an approach for choosing things that people were likely to notice. The idea was to make it useful for people who didn't know anything about the subject to start with. This wasn't designed to appeal to the professional entomologists. It was for the person who just saw something and wanted to know what that bug was. So we thought, well, we'll do the same thing for all of nature in New England. And so Kimberly and I came here and traveled around all 6 states of the region at all times of year and just took notes on what was catching our attention, took photographs of things, just trying to figure out what will people see, what will they want to know about. So we had a lot of personal discoveries. I mean, the research is the fun part. Sitting down to write is no fun at all, but the research can be great fun. And so we both learned a lot about plants during this trip. This is a nodding trillium over here, and there's a nodding amateur botanist trying to figure it out. Some of the things that I learned will seem sort of strange to you, but I had lived, this is out in far western Connecticut here. Well, I had lived in Arizona for quite a few years. I'd lived in Tucson and got to know the natural history there quite well. But coming to the Northeast and traveling around, some things took me by surprise at first. And this is going to seem obvious to those of you who have spent time out in the woods looking at flowers. Learning about the wildflowers, things like the foam flower and starflower and trout lily, those are all forest wildflowers. They all bloom in early spring. And at first I thought, gee, that's an interesting coincidence that there are so many flowers inside the forest in early spring. But finally, you know, had this sort of duh moment and realized, well, that's because in early spring the trees haven't leafed out yet. There's more sunlight getting to the forest floor. So it's an obvious time for those things to be blooming. And it may be obvious to a naturalist in New England, but to me it seemed like a new discovery. I really enjoyed getting acquainted with the mollusks, getting acquainted with the seashells. There's just so much diversity. And of course, most of them we don't get to observe in their natural habitat. But just seeing these shells washing up on the beach is like a hint of all this wonderful diversity that's living out there in the water. And learning more about some of the birds, I thought I knew the birds, but when we came to Maine and started spending more time there and looking at things like the Atlantic puffins, you know, if you drive up the coast of Maine, you see puffins absolutely everywhere on signs and on storefronts and things. But if you want to see the actual bird, it's more of a challenge. You have to get on a boat and go out around the islands there. And people look at them and think, oh, this puffin is just this little clown bird. But in real life, you know, that puffin when it leaves those islands where it nests, it may go 300 miles out to sea. They spend the winter out there, way out in the middle of the Atlantic. They're very tough little birds, and they deserve respect. They'll never get it, but they deserve it. And then another discovery about birds that meant a lot to me was learning about some of the connections between the nesting birds here and wintering birds in Central America, because we were also starting to work with people doing conservation work in southern Mexico and Central America. This wood thrush is one of the most beautiful bird songs. It's got this rich fluting song. You can still find them in good numbers nesting in forested areas here in Connecticut. But their numbers have dropped quite a bit over the last 40 years. They're not nearly as numerous as they were at one time. One of the things that's happening is loss of habitat on the wintering grounds. And there are certain kinds of habitats they just can't survive in. They can't survive in cornfields for the winter. They can't survive in any kind of agriculture that's out in bright sun. But there is a type of agriculture there that's actually good for birds, where people are growing coffee in the traditional way. Originally, coffee was native to Ethiopia, and it grew in the shade of mountain forest. And there are a lot of places still in Central America where they grow coffee in the shade. They sort of clear out the undergrowth of native forest and plant the coffee bushes there. And that can be wonderful habitat for birds. In birding trips down there, we go to coffee plantations because they're so good. And wood thrushes winter there in good numbers. Unfortunately, there's a lot of coffee being grown in full sun now in Central America, and the people just clear off the forest, plant the coffee out in the sun, use lots of fertilizer and lots of pesticides, and that habitat, it's not good for the people who work there. It doesn't support wildlife at all. So if you want to drink coffee that's actually going to be supporting bird life, you can look for the symbol up there. The scientists from the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center have this certification for bird-friendly coffee. It's based on like the structure of the forest, you know, the kinds of tree species that grow there and so on. They can measure it scientifically and say, okay, this is bird-friendly habitat. And Kimberly and I have actually gone and surveyed the birds on a coffee farm in Nicaragua that's certified as bird-friendly. There's all kinds of birds there in winter. It's a wonderful place. There is one brand, you know, we're not doing advertising here, but you can find that seal, the bird-friendly coffee seal, on a number of different brands. And Birds and Beans is one brand that's headquartered in New England that sells nothing but the bird-friendly coffee. So just, you know, for us, every time we were out here in spring and summer and just traveling around and hearing the bird song, we were thinking about that connection to the wintering grounds in Central America.
And I did want to mention that if you're interested in learning more about the subject of bird-friendly coffee or Birds and Beans, the website, it's birdsandbeans.org, and there's a lot of information both about how to get the coffee and also just about the issue of shade coffee versus sun coffee. So Kenn has shared some of his favorite personal discoveries, and for me, I mentioned to you earlier that I grew up on a farm in Ohio, and in fact, I grew up in a big family, and my dad was a farmer, so we were, you know, a very happy family. My family still, the whole family lives within a 15-mile radius circle of each other, and when I was growing up, no one in my world really aspired to be a world traveler or an author, and so I suddenly found myself, somewhat later in life, married to Kenn Kaufman, who had traveled literally to every continent multiple times and had had all of these incredible adventures, and he wasn't done. He still wants to travel, and he wants to take me with him. So my life changed dramatically in short order. And I remember one particular conversation that Kenn and I had when we were dating. I was still living in Ohio. Kenn was in Tucson, and he was telling me, I was asking him, you know, tell me some of your favorite adventures, your birding adventures, and he told me about being in Antarctica and on a ship passing icebergs with dotted with penguins, and I just couldn't even imagine that. And so finally Kenn says, well, where's your dream destination, Kim? Where would you really most like to go? And I said, Florida. I would really like to go to Florida someday. And Kenn is so sweet and thoughtful. He didn't laugh or anything. He just said, he just said, I think we can do that. So I'm pleased to say we've been to Florida a number of times. But when we started to talk about putting this book together and talked about having to come to New England numerous times, I was so excited to get to visit some of these places that are so rich in history and biodiversity. And for some folks, I imagine, who have lived in New England all their life, especially near the coast, the whole idea of going out whale watching, folks might be a bit jaded to that whale idea. But for me, having not left Ohio much at all, the thought of going out on a ship into the ocean, and not just us, but on a ship filled with other people who were so excited to see these incredible creatures, was a life-changing experience for me. And I will never forget that moment that the first whale broke the surface of the ocean, and everyone cheered, and it's almost impossible to wrap your brain around a creature that is so enormous. And so for me, going on a whale watching trip was just a real personal discovery. I also discovered, growing up in the middle of agricultural country, that I am a complete tidal pool junkie. I just love tidal pools. And when we're in the field, Kenn has this incredible ability to focus in on the subject at hand when we're doing research. And I can hang with him for a while, but then eventually I get a little distracted and I go off to look at other things. But I learned that in terms of a tidal pool, it's hard to tear myself away, and Kenn would eventually have to say, Kim, it's getting dark, we're going to have to go, or you'll be washed out to sea when the tide comes in. But I think it's more than just the idea that there are these bizarre creatures that you can't imagine when you're living in landlocked Ohio. It's the whole setting of a tidal pool. It's not just the bizarre creatures, it's this incredible view beneath the glistening surface of the water against this just incredible mosaic of color. Every time I get down on my knees at the edge of a tidal pool, I feel like I'm peering down into this living work of art. And I always just feel incredibly blessed to get to experience that kind of thing. Kenn mentioned botany, and up until the point that we started researching the book, I'd sort of held botany off at arm's length because I'm trying to learn wildflowers and insects and birds and trees. But the whole plant thing, I thought, I don't think I'm going to have enough time or RAM in my brain to learn plants. But on Hog Island, they have carnivorous plants like pitcher plants and these little sundews. These little sundew plants live down in the shadows. They're very inconspicuous, and they're carnivorous. They actually trap insects and eat them, and how fascinating. And I found that I thought I might have enough time, perhaps, in my life to at least learn a few plants. And speaking of the inconspicuous creatures that live in New England, there's one particular animal that I was really, really looking forward to seeing when we did our research. I was sure that I would. I'd wanted to see this creature my entire life, so going to New England, where theoretically these creatures are frolicking along the roadsides, I thought, finally, I'm going to get to see this tiny little thing that's eluded me all my life. I really want to see a moose. And so when we came to New England, as we're driving through Vermont, we start to see moose crossing signs, and I start to get excited and wiggle in my seat and tell Ken, in 7 miles, Vermont says I will see a moose. Counting down the miles, 5 miles, 2 miles. In the next mile, there will certainly be moose along the road, and I will live out my dream. Nothing. We traveled through all of the New England states at every time of year. We've gone to other places in the country where there are supposed to be moose, and it's a sure shot, Kim. If you go here at this particular, at 7:11 p.m., you will see a moose. But alas, I remain mooseless. And I still hold out hope that perhaps on this trip there may be a chance for us to see a moose. But the interesting thing is that this mooselessness of mine has sort of taken on this life of its own. And if I do see a moose on this trip, as I've told Kenn, a great cry will rise out across them. You will hear Kim celebrating the fact that she has finally seen her moose. But she can't tell anybody, especially not my friends in Ohio, because what started to happen is that my friends who like to torment me a little bit started sending me hilarious moose gifts. For example, my very serious friend who works IT security for KeyBank sent me this moose hat for Christmas, and she insists that I wear this thing on all of the Christmas bird counts. So I indulge her. I have a friend who does jewelry and wood carving, and believe it or not, this is such an adorable little thing. It's only about this big. It's a tiny miniature of a moose and a moose crossing. So some of these gifts are wonderful. And they pass down into the practical, who doesn't need a good pair of socks, and also a moose refrigerator magnet. Those are certainly useful. The award for the most creative moose tormenting of Kim goes to our friend Kenn, who lives in Wyoming and frolics with moose every day at the base of the mountains. And that's actually moose droppings. So Kenn thought he would find a pleasant little way to send Kim a message about the fact that he was seeing moose without actually tormenting me with a photo of the moose. And finally, my friend Lynn, who lives in Minnesota and does, in fact, have moose frolicking in the yard near their cabin in northern Minnesota, sent me this adorable little moose. It fits on the end of your finger. I call it the world's cutest little moose, and it's become my moose-scot. We take it along with us. It's here with me today so that everywhere we go, I have this little moose-scot to try and help me find a moose someday. So you have to cheer me on and help support my quest to see a moose.
Well, I used to see moose all the time. Before we got married, I used to see moose just constantly. I think possibly Kimberly is a jinx. Since we got married, this is about the largest mammal that we've seen. But so after spending years driving around New England not seeing moose, eventually we got to the stage where we had to go back and put the book together. We'd finished the research, and actually sitting down to put it together is not quite as much fun, but the publishers were leaning on us to go ahead and get this thing done. So we eventually had to do that. Now, if you've looked at any of the previous books in the series, the way they're illustrated is with photographs that have been digitally edited. There's this ongoing controversy as to whether the field guides should be illustrated with paintings or photos, but we use photos. Actually, my bird guide back in 2000 was the first field guide to be illustrated that way, just taking a photo, taking out the background, and then editing it to make it comparable to other photos. And it goes beyond just taking out the background. This is a great shearwater. It's one of the seabirds that you find offshore. Out on a boat trip, it can be hard with the bouncing of the boat and the harsh light to get a good photo. But if you work on it in Photoshop for an hour or so, you can come up with a reasonably good illustration. Or you can start with the world's worst photograph of a blue jay and make it into one that's only moderately bad. There's quite a bit that can be done with it. So that's the way all these color plates in the books are put together. They sort of look as if they've been painted, but it's actually photographs taken out of their backgrounds and lined up. And I'm fairly happy with the way it works out. We like to look at photos of things in their natural habitat, but if you line up a lot of photos of things in natural habitat, it becomes hard to make comparisons. So on this plate of warblers, there are quite a few birds there, but I think you can see their details pretty well, and you can compare them all and see what they look like. That's because they've all been edited that way and taken out of their backgrounds. If we just used the original photos, it would look more like that. And it's quite attractive in sort of an abstract way, but it's a little harder to follow what's going on with the detail. So we're pretty convinced that this is the way to go with illustrating a book like this. And just, clean out the background, clean up the shadows and things, make everything directly comparable so you can get more illustrations on a page and fit more things into a compact book that you can still fit into your pocket. So that's how we've been doing this. And it was exciting with this book to use it for plants for the first time. This is interrupted fern, and it takes a little while to take the background out, but once you can line up all the different ferns side by side and see how their structure is different. And so we're doing the same thing with trees, lining up the leaves for comparison, comparing different flowers, and it actually makes for some fairly attractive plates. So we're happy with it so far.
So I thought we would mention sort of a background project that Kenn and I are working on while we're doing this book tour, believe it or not. When the publicist at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt was putting together our book tour, they didn't think that that was challenging enough. They wanted Ken and I to prove the value of the field guides, so they came up with the idea of challenging us to see a certain number of species during our book tour. And so they asked Ken and I to come up with a number that seemed reasonable, and we talked and came up with a number 250. We think we can see 250 species during this ambitious book tour. The folks at Houghton Mifflin wrote back and said, "We reject your number." We think that you're Kenn and Kim Kaufman, you're these great naturalists, and you've got this new book now. We think you should see 350. And Ken and I said, why not? And we felt okay about that for a number of reasons, especially once we got here and found our rental car that was waiting for us. It wasn't some Jeep or an Outback. It's a 2013 Ford Mustang. And so we've been racing all around New England in this hot rod. We've been calling it the Nature Mobile, which seems sort of funny. But it's actually a very practical car, and it's worked out well. We started out rather slow. We were in the city for the first couple of days, and we did pick up birds and some plants in the city. We had a chance to go to the seashore at Cape Cod, and we had a wonderful morning doing a sea watch. And these are northern gannets. These are just incredible birds that they'll fly up and plunge straight down into the water to fish. And we had a number of those just off the coast. And we're not just looking at birds, we're looking at all living things, and they gave us a little break and allowed us to include constellations and also rocks, since those things are also covered in the field guide. And this is poison ivy. And a lot of us have the same kind of reaction, ooh, poison ivy. But in fact, poison ivy in the fall is a really lovely plant if you admire it from a safe distance. But it also provides really incredible food source for birds and wildlife. So if you have a place that you can let poison ivy sort of do its own thing and be in a respectful distance from where you live and play, poison ivy is a really valuable and beautiful plant. Ken and I also made a brief stop in Rhode Island to visit to go for this very rare bird. This is a wood sandpiper. There are only a handful of accounts of this thing ever coming to the U.S., and a friend of ours that lives in Rhode Island, a great naturalist, said, I'm willing to take you out and show you where this thing's at. Well, Ken and I had no boots, and we literally slogged half a mile out into the marsh to look for this wood sandpiper, and we found it. And I just held my little pocket camera up to a spotting scope, so that's why this sort of has this dreamy quality to the photo. But ultimately, the reason why we felt like 350 was a reasonable number is that the biodiversity here in New England is so rich, and you really don't have to go out to some pristine wilderness to see nature. And this was really highlighted for us a few days ago when we spoke to an auditorium full of 6th and 7th graders in the city. And we had a chance to take one class outside to explore using the new book. We didn't get 10 feet out of the school doors and out into the yard, and we found this little patch of dirt, and there were random weeds growing there. And down in the weeds, we found shepherd's purse growing. And if you're not familiar with this plant, it's really inconspicuous. There's not much to recommend about it. But in the fall, the seed pods on shepherd's purse are the most lovely little heart-shaped seed pods. And so even these 6th and 7th grade boys, when I got them down there on their knees to show them the little hearts, they all said, "Oh," even the boys.
Yeah, this boy might not have said that, but so we're racing around trying to, in between stops to give programs and book signings and things, trying to check off 350 species and having pretty good success. We're over 250 now, and we still have another 8.5 days to go. So one of the reasons we thought there was a good chance is just because there's so much rich diversity here, and when we've traveled here, we try to get people excited about it. We do things that we call, like for example, our porch light evangelism. If we're visiting friends who have got any kind of like trees or anything around the house, we'll say, well, let's leave the porch light on late in the evening and then see what comes in, because we might get something like a Luna moth showing up. So there are beautiful moths that are found all over New England, and some of them keep flying quite late into the fall. We haven't seen any of these on this trip, but we still could. There are something like 20 times as many different kinds of moths as there are butterflies. They come in all colors of the rainbow, and they'll come to porch lights. Or if you're more ambitious, we do these things that we call moth parties, where we'll put up bright lights and paint moth bait on the trees, and stay up till 3 in the morning, see what interesting moths and other bugs come in. So it's that kind of thing is great for getting people interested if they're not the type to go out and chase birds around. Or flowers are, you don't have to go to a wilderness area to see wildflowers. There's so many things like spring beauties and blue-eyed grass that will bloom around the edges of parking lots. There are butterflies like the eastern tiger swallowtail. It's a strong flying butterfly, and we've seen it flying down like main streets in Boston, even in the middle of the city. So nature will come to us. Nature will come to bird feeders outside the window. As Kimberly mentioned, that it was goldfinches on a feeder that got her interested in birds in the first place, and look where she is now. And if you're talking to, one of those tough teenage boys who won't pay attention to, something like a chickadee or a goldfinch, you can always pull out something like a peregrine falcon, the fastest flying bird in the world. It nests on buildings in some of the large cities throughout New England and the Northeast. So anywhere you look, there are going to be aspects of nature that you can use to try to get people interested in natural history.
It's true. If you just go outside on any given day, anywhere that you are, nature is everywhere, and it's free. And every time that we go outside, even on the brief trip from the car, from the inn where we're staying to the car, there's something out there that's new and interesting. And we do a lot of programs for kids, and we always try to tell them that you don't have to be an expert, but just be aware, because there's this treasure out there, and it's free, and it belongs to all of us. All we have to do is go out and look for it. And I was so pleased when we arrived at the library to see the tagline right here on the side, connect, discover, grow. And that really encapsulates everything that Ken and I stand for these days. We're trying to connect as many people as we can to this, just an awareness, and even, we hope, an appreciation of nature. Because once you discover these things, you learn, you grow as a person. And it's a wonderful thing to be aware of, even if you're not out every day slogging around in the mud looking for some crazy wood sandpiper. It doesn't have to be that intense. It just helps us have a better understanding of our world and the things that share this planet with us.
So really, for us, it represents our favorite approach to spending time outdoors, where we just go out and look for everything, go out with an open mind and appreciate what shows up. It's hard to be structured about it. You can't do a lesson plan ahead of time because you don't know what's going to appear. And the only thing we really know for sure is that if we go outside and look around, we're going to see natural beauty. Even if we have a little vacant lot in the city, there's going to be something amazing and something natural that's found right there. So you want to finish?
Sure. Okay. When we put the book together, we really wanted a book that would go into the hands of people who already had an interest in nature to help enhance that interest. But ultimately, what we hope is that it will serve as a tool for people who are already interested to engage others. So it has a little something for everyone. So no matter what that person's spark may be, whether it's beautiful spring wildflowers or birds or butterflies or geology, we hope that it will serve you in engaging others in this wonderful pastime and really enhancing the quality of their life. What a beautiful gift to give the gift of nature to someone who hasn't yet discovered it. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming today.
We probably covered everything. Oh, okay. Yes.
You mentioned that this is going to be, you'll do a series of areas. What's your next geographic?
Go ahead, Ken.
Well, we've actually already launched into doing a similar guide for the Midwestern states, and since we live there, we can research that in our backyard. Yeah, it's a good excuse to travel and look at things, and gives us a chance to go outside and play. So we're already well along with the Midwest, but right now we're reveling in New England and what a rich area this is. Yes.
We haven't specifically, not on this book tour, but we really hope that having the books in libraries and places like this will make it accessible to those kind of groups, absolutely. So we hope that's exactly the kind of audience that we were hoping the book would get into the hands of.
And when I was a kid, I was in the Boy Scouts for years. I was a nature counselor at a summer camp, at a scout camp. And the Bird Observatory has done educational programs for scout groups in Ohio. So we really hope this will wind up at all the Boy Scout and Girl Scout camps and other youth group camps. Just, hopefully it'll spark some interest there. Thank you. Yes.
When you were putting the book together, did you know all the names, the species of different plants, whatever we saw? How did you come up with the names, or you knew from the beginning?
Yes, we knew the name of every species. No, of course not. We really tapped into a lot of local knowledge for the wildflowers. The New England Wildflower Society, which is a wonderful organization, was very helpful. And also in terms of just helping us sort of call down the list of what to include. But we had a lot of fun out in the field. You saw the image of all those field guides. Ken and I literally went outside and just immersed ourselves in nature to see what would we discover, what would catch our eye, and then put that on the list, photograph it, research it, key it out in whatever field guide that we had along. So we did our own research when we were in the field. And I think that really helped to develop the text for the book, because we were out asking ourselves the same questions that the readers would be asking about how to identify these things.
We still don't know the names of all these things. We're carrying the book with us, and we'll see. Like yesterday, we saw American hornbeam, and I was looking at this tree and said, "Okay, I know it's one of these three things. We have to pull out the book to look it up and see what it is."
I had a moment in the last couple of days when we've been so busy and having so much fun, but we were outside and we were keying out. We're looking at a different tree, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, we're using our field guide to identify things." It was really wonderful.
Yes. That's a really good point. The question was whether leaving lights on all night, whether they're bad for insects, and I think probably they probably do have a detrimental effect in areas that are really built up where there are lots of lights. There aren't nearly as many moths as we find if we go way out into a wilderness. So when we're out, doing the moth thing at night, we'll have the bright lights up while we're attracting things, but then we make sure that we turn them off well before daylight, so those insects can go out and disperse away from there. So yeah, I think unnecessary lights on at night probably aren't that good for insects. The Hog Island? You mean the Hog Island Audubon Camp? Yeah, it's...
Yeah, absolutely. They have a series of camps that focus on different aspects of studies. And there's a great website. They've got the camp schedule, I believe, pretty much solidified for 2013. Most of the camps, I believe, at least the bulk of them, take place in June. Is that right, Ken?
June and July.
Yeah, June and July. But it's just the most marvelous experience, not just in terms of the natural history, but just to stay on an island. They have just a marvelous chef. The food is just out of this world. So if you want to go and have sort of casual nature studies and meet wonderful people and stay on a just beautiful, beautiful island, I would highly recommend it. So yeah, but the camp is going strong. It's being promoted now by National Audubon. It's run by Maine Audubon. But I'd really encourage you to check it out. Yes, it is. It is included in the book, yes.
Yeah, at least in the acknowledgments, I'm sure it's mentioned there. But yeah, if you can remember Hog Island, Maine, it's the Hog Island Audubon Camp, and it was established in 1936. So it's got a great tradition and great history. Yes. We hope to. We hope to keep doing regional guides, and in some parts of the West it becomes more complicated, and so we have to break it down into smaller regions. For example, in New England, there's one kind of chipmunk. The state of California has 13 species of chipmunks, so it's, which seems excessive to me. It's, I mean, 5 or 6 chipmunks ought to be enough. But so there are at least 1.5 times as many different kinds of flowering plants in California as there are in all of New England. So, and then you get into like the Southwest, it's different. I'm sorry? Yeah. Yeah, we hope to do the Southwest. I've still got lots of photos that I took when I was living in Arizona, so that's certainly on our list of things we want to do. Yes.
What is your view on invasive species in New England? I'm thinking of European Phragmites that are growing to 10 feet in ponds, and loosestrife that's growing in water. I'm sure there are animals and insects too. But what have you found? What do you think?
Well, the whole 350 species challenge is really just for fun, but it's also become a real learning experience because we're finding that as you're driving along or if you're just in a quick walk, a lot of what you'll see are invasives. So we're going to keep track and perhaps do a little something, write that up, but we address that in the book. And there's a fairly lengthy conservation chapter in this New England guide, and we talk about the problem with invasives and encourage everyone to learn what plants are native in your area and what plants are not, and talk about the really terrible impact that invasive species are having. You can go to some wetland areas now in many places, and it's a monoculture of Phragmites. It chokes out every other native plant, and things like bittersweet. It's unfortunate that a lot of these things are so beautiful. I mean, bittersweet is such an attractive thing, and a lot of people use it in decorations and dried flower arrangements. Unfortunately, eventually that's all there will be. So we really felt it was important to include a lot of text in the book that addresses the problem of invasive species.
Yes.
How about the comeback of former native species? I see you've got the coyote and black bear have been seen in Connecticut, even in New Canaan, and I'm very encouraged by that. What are your feelings and findings on comebacks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were happy to be able to have some good news in there too. Things like peregrine falcon and osprey that were down to low numbers and have come back. White-tailed deer was almost wiped out from New England at one time, and it's certainly doing well now. And so there's some really good news as well. And so we just think the more people know about the wildlife and what's native and natural here, the more likely we are to be able to make good decisions about things like managing habitat at wildlife sanctuaries and that kind of thing. So, yes.
Are you going to stay long enough today to autograph books?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll stay as long as anyone wants us to.
As a bear?
As a bird, excellent.
Great.
Great.
Thanks for not saying moose. I think that's beautiful.
Okay.
Oh, did you? Oh, one more.
I wonder whether you could give us like a top 5 birding spots in this neck of the woods, so maybe Fairfield County or Western Connecticut, to take beginning birders out. Because I think you're right that birds are a great way to get people out, and then it's a touchstone to nature and to other things and to habitat. But I haven't been really successful in dragging a lot of my friends out and convincing them that it's a good way to take a walk.
Well, I would say more important than a specific place to go is more of a general approach. And I can't say enough about bird feeders. If you can go to this, Ken and I walked across the street to the Nature Center that's just down the road here, and we had a fantastic walk last evening. Saw a lot of different birds. So you don't have to take them out on a hike into the wilderness, but to go to a nature center where they can sit and enjoy bird feeders, especially if they have hummingbirds coming. That's always a wonderful sort of an introductory bird for people. The other thing is to go to a pond or a lake where you have geese or swans and waterfowl, because they tend to be much more approachable than things like warblers that are flitting through the trees. So I would encourage those kind of things as you start out, if you're trying to drag your friends along with you. I mean, just make it as easy for them to see the birds as possible the first couple times out.
Yeah, you say in Westport? Okay. See, we don't have that much local knowledge about places to go here. The Greenwich Audubon Center is only about half an hour away from here, and that's a wonderful destination. This new Canaan Nature Center up here, we were really impressed with that.
That was wonderful.
But I would say, yeah, if you can tap into local expertise and look for places, as Kimberly was saying, places where the birds are, where there might be some large birds or birds that are relatively approachable so that people can get good looks their first time.
And you don't have to be some expert birder. Some of the worst experiences I've had on bird walks were with the best, most expert birders. Because they forget, well, not you, but they forget what it's like to be a beginner. And so they want to rush people. Oh, don't look at that cardinal or that blue jay. Come over here and, look at this interesting gull and the plumage that it's in. And so I think just having a good time and being open-minded about things is the best approach. I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I hope more and more people will introduce others, beginners, to birds and all of nature, because that really gets at the heart of your question. Humans can make a very positive impact on the environment. We can have comeback stories, but we just have to have more people that are aware and that care, because we're not going to support things if we don't understand and we don't care about it. So I think it's wonderful that you're even asking that question, and maybe Ken and I could sort of drum up a list of some other things. Also, on our blog, you can follow along on our 350 Species Challenge. It's Birding with Ken and Kimberly, and we're blogging about our book tour and the 350 Species Challenge. But there's a search engine on our blog, and if you just type in beginner bird walks, Ken and I published just in the last month or so a PDF on how to lead a beginner bird walk, where to go and what to do and what not to do. And maybe that would be helpful for you. I'd encourage you to look for that. Thank you.
Okay. We did actually see a few bluebirds down at that Greenwich Audubon Center yesterday, and for moth bait. Now, this is good stuff. Moth bait, you just need several very, very ripe bananas.
Rotten.
Well, yeah, extremely ripe bananas. And you mix it with a lot of brown sugar and a little bit of stale beer. Don't use the good stuff, but, some stale, cheap beer mixed with brown sugar and bananas, and make this sort of thick paste, and then you just paint it on tree trunks. Sometimes it sort of discolors the bark. So you don't want to do it like right in the middle of a scenic spot in your garden, but sort of on the back of a tree trunk. And moths will be attracted to that. And sometimes some kinds of moths, really colorful ones that don't come to lights that well, will come to the bait. So
our sort of general approach is 24 ounces of beer, 3 pounds of brown sugar, and 4 or 5, they're black with the skin sort of sloughing off the banana, and mix it up so it's a thick soupy consistency. I also, every time we make this up, I would encourage you to make it in some kind of a jug or a bucket that has a wide mouth, so you can stick a paintbrush in. That's the best way to brush it on the trees. And I'm always tempted that, I'd really like to baste a ham with this someday. Not necessarily good for moths, but it's a good question.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.